All right, thanks, guys. All right, John 1, everybody, go back to John 1, where we've been last couple of weeks. Just going to spend a few more weeks in this passage, probably say a few things about John 1 next week as well in our Christmas service. But I want to continue this God Down Here series in this passage. And this morning, we're going to focus on just a few verses and a few key words within these verses. But first, I want to say Christmas, we've been kind of reflecting on the blessings of the season, fun parts of the season. Last night, we were driving home from a Christmas party and drove through the neighborhood. We get to live in this cool neighborhood in Tumwater, and driving through the Tumwater Hill neighborhood there, enjoying the lights, and kids always love that. And it kind of brought me back as we were driving through, remembering my childhood and going on those rides with my parents. And it's kind of neat as a dad to go through Christmas kind of through the eyes of your kids. You know, you enjoy it in that sense. And it was awesome. And there's all sorts of parts of the season that are refreshing and enjoyable. We've said everything from the music this time of year to the decorations to the lights and the Christmas cookies and the different things that we get to enjoy, right? But the climax of it all, and let me put this actually to you. Let's see, in this time, whenever I put this out and we kind of have some interaction, usually there are no wrong answers. This time there are wrong answers. There's one right answer, okay? But what is the climax? So now you know the pressure's on. What is the climax of the Christmas season? What is everything building up to in terms of our experience of this season? What is like the culmination, climax of it all? What is it? Who's prepared to answer? The presents. Dave, you nailed it, man. First try. Great job. So exchanging gifts on Christmas morning. That really is the climax, is it? Because from that point on, everything winds down, doesn't it? I mean, it's right away. I remember as a kid, that feeling when it's all over and the last gift is opened, it's kind of like, oh man, you hate that it's over, right? So that's the climactic moment. And that's where really we are, in a very real sense, experiencing the concept of grace. The word grace shows up in John chapter 1 quite a few times. The verses we're going to look at this morning mention grace over and over again. And that's where we experience, in a very tangible way, grace. We give gifts, we receive gifts. When we receive a gift, it's something that we didn't work for, we didn't pay for, we didn't go out and shop for. Someone else got it for us. Unless you're one of those people that buys yourself presents that you get to open on Christmas morning, which does happen occasionally. We won't ask who in here does that, but I'm sure some of you have done that. Grace, receiving someone else's effort, someone else's money was spent, their time was spent to get you a gift. Christmas is a time to think about grace. Christmas is a time to think about grace in the horizontal, and it's a time to think about grace in the vertical, and that's what we're going to do here in John 1. So I'm going to have you focus in on verses 14 through 18. Let's read them, and let's just say a little bit about God's grace and how amazing it really is. We have the song Amazing Grace. We're going to think about how amazing it really is. So John 1, 14 through 18 says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we saw his glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified about him and cried out, saying, 'This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me. For of his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time, the only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father. He has explained him.'" I hope you heard the word grace over and over there as I was reading. And to help us think about what grace is, I want to focus first of all on this phrase, the law was given through Moses, in verse 17. The law was given through Moses. We've been in Exodus. Those of you who have been in our church here the last few, months and months now. It may have been even a year at this point. But we've been in Exodus for a while. And it wasn't long ago we were in Exodus 20 looking at the giving of the Ten Commandments. And the word law can refer to more of what Moses was involved with and what he recorded. But let's just, for simplicity's sake, focus on the Ten Commandments, okay? Have no other gods before him. And all the way down the list to the last one being, you shall not covet, right? And everything in between there regarding righteous treatment of God and other people, the Ten Commandments, okay? And he says here, the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. Well, what is the law for? What was the effect of it, or what was God up to in giving the law through Moses? Well, if you've been a part of our series, hopefully you remember. Some of you may not remember at all, but I remember because I'm the one delivering the messages. The first and primary focus we've had with regard to the law is that it's helpful in terms of governing their society, right? It gives Moses and the other appointees, the other judges that he appointed to be involved in governing society, it gives them parameters or rules or laws by which to govern their growing society, laws to enforce, to, in a very real sense, protect them as a people, okay? To, in a way, curb the flesh, and to, we could even say in one regard, to scare people into proper conduct so that they wouldn't destroy their society with sin. So there's kind of that emphasis, but then there's the deeper intention of the law, which is to reveal the human heart, to expose people as needing their God, as needing salvation, to reveal that we don't have, naturally speaking, we don't have love. We don't treat God or others appropriately. We could use the biblical term righteously. We're not righteous in and of ourselves. It also exposes that reality, that spiritual reality. And that's the most important thing. And it points us to our need for Jesus, frankly. And as we've been seeing throughout Exodus, God has a variety of ways of showing us that. And all of that is Him not in some sense like withholding grace, but that's Him giving grace. Like it's gracious of God to show us our need for God's grace. Does that make sense? So when he says here, the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. Some of your translations may say, but grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. Well, that word but that appears in certain translations is not in the original, so some translators make a decision to stick that in there. And in a sense, that may be helpful, but it may also be unhelpful because it almost seems like there's a contrast. Like as if God was not gracious back then, but then He was gracious when Jesus came. And that's not what we've been seeing. We've been seeing God is gracious. His character is gracious. And it's really about the perpetual pouring out of grace into this world in progressive revelation as God reveals Himself, okay? So He's consistent. So the law reveals our need. The law shows us that we are not by nature loving. We may be nice people. We may be able to behave in certain external ways. We may even be better than other people in terms of how we behave, and that may be more beneficial in our society to behave the way we behave than others. We may be able to look at things like that and conclude that somehow we are more loving or more righteous. But when you really look at what God has defined as love, if you're really in touch with yourself for who you are, you don't have the kind of love that He describes, how He defines love. You don't naturally have it, and I don't naturally have it either. And we've talked about before that the opposite of love is hate. And when you think of hate, what comes to your mind? Let's interact more. And this time you can just think out loud with me. But when you think of hate, a human hateful act, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? What'd you say? Pain. Okay, someone said murder. Did I hear murder? Murder. That's what I think of. What was the other one? Warfare. Okay. We think of hate. We think of like the most violent expression of human sin. That's what we think of. But when you look at the way the Bible defines love versus hate, and 1 John is especially helpful for this, the way the Bible defines love versus hate, love is selfless and giving, and hate is selfish and taking. Hate is consumption. So while we think of the most extreme expression of sin when we think of hate, really it is far more all-encompassing. Hate has to do with even impatience or greed or I mean, try to think of the most benign, I don't know, anxiety, fearing when Jesus says, don't be afraid, and yet we're constantly afraid. I mean, there's a sense in which that is a manifestation of human hate, even though we usually categorically wouldn't connect those two. But the Bible describes the human heart as in rebellion against God since the beginning. We have this, as a result of that, this emptiness. There's spiritual death, and the expression of spiritual death is hateful. And what hateful means is not somebody with a really angry look on their face doing something violent necessarily, although that is one manifestation. More broadly, what it is it's someone who's empty, trying to secure themselves, satisfy themselves, you name it, trying to survive, trying to derive life from experiences, trying to fight for their lives. It's trying to fill that void is what it is. It's trying to fill up the emptiness. It's that part of us that feels like we just need to take in order to live. And where that gets aimed is typically at other people. So that, and this is a little complicated, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but so that even the seemingly good things we do can still be hateful in that they're driven by self-interest. Some of the ladies have been studying human personality types, and it's been a helpful conversation. Jill and I have had a lot of conversations about it as she's been reading and thinking through. There's a variety of different ways that psychologists have tried to categorize human personalities, and they can be helpful in different ways depending on which one you look at. But one of the things I find most helpful is like they give you descriptions that help you see how the way we're all wired, we're wired differently, and there's like a dark side to how we're all wired. So, and here's why I say that. Because you can look and you can think of maybe certain people that you would consider them the nicest people you know, the jolliest, nicest people, and they may be servants. I mean, they're always giving and serving, and you may be tempted to look at that person and say, wow, there is a loving, selfless person, and yet when you really dig into motivation and what's behind that, even the most seemingly selfless, servant-hearted person, if it's an actual human being and not Christ himself, there are mixed motives. There's something they're getting out of that. They're filling that void or trying to fill that void through what they're doing. Do you follow? That's part of being human. That's part of being fallen. We every year, Jill and the girls make Christmas cookies. And my favorite are they're like our own version of Thin Mints. You know the Girl Scout cookies, Thin Mints? These are better than those. And they're made with Ritz crackers and some minty chocolate concoction that's amazing. And every year they'll make tons of them and all different ones. Not just those. Those are my favorite. And they'll pass them out to the neighbors. And I love that we do that, and the neighbors appreciate it, and we get all sorts of nice thank you cards and things like that as a result. And I watch them go out the door, and I'm thinking, how many of those Thin Mints? So are there any left in the cupboard? And so we're giving, and somewhere in there is me saying, hey, wait a minute, if we give too many of those away, and you could ask Juliana, she would tell you I've had plenty. She's been monitoring my consumption of the Thin Mints. She'll tell you I've had plenty. But even when we give, there's this fear of just kind of, well, what if I don't get anything in return, or I might end up losing here. Do you know what I mean? It has something to do with our condition. Because you see, in and of ourselves, we, at some level, are aware there's an emptiness there, and I got to get something for that. And so here's what it says, okay? And the end of verse 14, it says, Jesus is full of grace and truth. And that word full is like thinking of a container full and overflowing. Full of grace and truth. That is who Jesus is. That is who God is. He is full. He is not empty. He is not in need of anything. He doesn't operate and negotiate through life in a way to try to get for himself in the way we humans do that. He is full and he is giving of himself, and he's always been giving of himself. And chapter 1 of John, and if you go all the way back to Genesis, you see God is giving. Even in creating everything, he's giving. And this picture of grace that's mentioned here in this passage is the grace of creation, it's the grace of salvation, and it's every other form of grace that you and I benefit from every single day, and really every moment of every day. It is God who is gracious, pouring out. The spillover of God is we get to exist, and we get all these common grace blessings, and we get the blessing of Christ who came and says, you're forgiven, you're accepted, you're justified. God has you. He has provided for you in the way you need it most. It's interesting. It says, of his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace. And I like the Net Bible translation of that. It says, one gracious gift after another. Christmas is an opportunity for us to slow down and acknowledge that our God is generous and gracious, that he is a giver, that he is full, and he has opted to share of that fullness with us in creating us in the first place and then redeeming us after we rebelled against him. He is eager to give. He is relentless in his commitment to give to us, even though we have our ways of stiff-arming. He just gives and gives and gives. This idea of the law was given through Moses. We said the law describes love, or what the Bible calls righteousness, a loaded term, but just think of what true love is. The law describes it, in a sense, defines it, it prescribes it, but it does not provide it. It doesn't provide it. And when it says here, grace and truth were realized, literally it came into being, that love was embodied in the person of Jesus. Jesus came and provided, lived out what the law in a limited way describes, prescribes. He is love. He shows God to be love. And what love is, as we said earlier, selfless and giving and sharing and serving with no limits. We have limits to ours when we give and share with other people, and we have limits. We're only going to give so many cookies away. And if you rub us the wrong way, you might not get cookies next year. God gives and gives and gives, and there is no deficiency. That's what this is describing. And this says that the coming of Jesus makes the character of God amazingly clear. It's his glory we have beheld. And so it says in verse 18, no one has seen God at any time, the only begotten God, the birthed God, the God who was incarnated. That God has explained him, has made it clear to us, more clear than it's ever been before. The most clear way of manifesting his heart is what God did in sending Jesus to live in our place, to die in our place. Remember, it says on Galatians, at the right time, Jesus was born of woman, born under the law. He comes and he fulfills the law out of his fullness, out of his limitless ability to love. He fulfills the law, which reassures us that we can be right with God completely on the basis of his substitution in our lives, his love for us, the outpouring of his love for us. That's what makes everything right. That is the hope for our relationship with God. That is the hope for fruitfulness in our lives. That is the hope for true manifestations of love coming through our lives horizontally. Remember, it says in Romans that God poured out his love, and it's kind of like the language, as I understand it, he poured his love into us through his Spirit, which he has given to us. Do you see how Christmas is about the outpouring of the grace of God, or another way of saying it, the gift of God himself, the gift of his love. And man, that is what we need the most. As I said last week, it's cliche, but that's the greatest gift of all. And this passage reminds us of that. It invites us to reflect on that truth, to see in this amazing plan of God sending his son into the world in the form of a little baby boy, and then he grows up and he lives this life of perfect love and dies manifesting perfect love, even when people are taking from him, taking his clothing, taking every last earthly possession he had, robbing him, and he dies and says, "Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing." That's love. Christmas is an opportunity to remember that, to remember how, going back to the garden, and I'll close with this, what was it that was beneath the rebellion that took place there? I mean, God had created Adam and Eve, he put them in the world, and they're on earth, and everything is fantastic, man. Must have been like perfect temperature. Everything in terms of like trees and the fruitfulness of those trees and the animals, and there's no curse, so there's no carnage at all. I mean, it's perfect. And God says, enjoy. And there's one tree you're not to eat from. And they're like, yeah, there's all that, but he's not. I mean, they didn't really believe he had been gracious to them, generous with them, or not enough. They needed more, right? And that was what was at the root of their rebellion, is questioning God's grace. And Christmas is God saying, look, I'm coming for you. I'm coming to show you just how gracious I am. Coming to save you from yourself, from your sin, from your lies, from your cravings, from your emptiness. Coming to give you myself. God says, of my fullness you will receive in this life and in the hereafter, forever. That's what from our perspective this holiday is about, something to think about and to be thankful for as we see the heart of God on display this time of year. I hope that's encouraging to you. It's been encouraging for me to reflect on this. Hope you can walk away giving thanks for who Christ is and his humble arrival and what he accomplished when he came. All right, let's close in prayer. God, thank you for John chapter 1. Thank you for the glimpse it gives us of your heart, your character, to consider that you are full when we so often feel like we've been robbed, shortchanged, like somehow things have been unfair. The contrast between your heart, your love, your grace, and what we naturally speaking our life are like, it couldn't be more stark. But yet, it's not the end of the story. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, lived in our place, died in our place, to show us that you truly are gracious, that you always have been, you always will be. To show us that the problem is not outside of us, and the problem is certainly not you. The problem is our fallen perspective, our selfishness, greediness, or taking. And then to reassure us that we are forgiven, that we are justified, declared right, that we are reconciled, that everything is okay between us, that you are not angry at us, that you love us, that you're involved in every detail of our lives, that you will see us through to the end, that we have eternal hope, everlasting joy awaits, and tastes of it, foretastes of it in the here and now. To think that in Christ we are complete and lacking nothing is truly amazing. Help us, God, to reflect on these truths, and that the benefit of it, the byproduct of it, would be miraculous love in and through us, spill over on other people, that they would see you as a result of that. So thank you for our time this morning. Thank you for the songs we've been able to sing. Thank you for the words that have been shared. Thank you for the encouragement. Thank you for our church and how you've kept us going over the years. And as we look ahead, thank you for what in advance here for what you'll do. In Jesus' name, amen.